Brigitte, please, for someone like you, maybe give your background of where I was raised in Iran. I lived there 10 years, and then I escaped with my family, went to Germany. We lived at a refugee camp for a year and a half, and then we came here on November 28, 1990. So I was there experiencing what it's like when people are marching saying, "Mad, bad, America, death upon America." When you experience it, it's going to stay with you for a long time to come, especially when you're a kid. Maybe share with the audience a little bit about your background and what the media is getting wrong, why some young people in America are confused. Gays for Gaza, there's a lot of organizations that seem like they're noble, they're doing the right thing, they feel like they're doing the right thing between Israel, Hamas, and Palestine. But where are people getting it wrong? So a little bit about your background and where people are getting it wrong with what's going on today.
Well, I want to first follow up on what you said, that you grew up hearing death to America.
Yes.
And when you hear that, it leaves an impression on you that you can never forget.
Absolutely.
The impression that it leaves is not the words. It's the hatred you have witnessed. It's what you saw that you recognize, your good soul recognized, because we're all born with good souls. We are all born pure, clear, no hatred, no bigotry as children. Everything else is dumped into us. So when you grow up as a child watching that and you think to yourself, I don't like that. My spirit doesn't like that. That's what you remember. And that's when you grow up and you realize what you saw, now I know a name for it. It's called evil. When you hate someone so much that you want to kill them, even though you don't know them, you think to yourself, how can somebody hate like that? I want to stay away from that. As a matter of fact, I chose to fight that because that affected your life, that affected my life. In my case, I was born as an only child to a Lebanese businessman. My father had a long career with the government. He retired, took all his money, his retirement, built real estate with it. So I was born into a very comfortable life. My father owned the biggest, most fanciest restaurant in southern Lebanon. People used to drive hours to get to it. So I was raised meeting the community, hearing people. My father had the first television set in our restaurant. First TV set, black and white.
By the way, that's a very big deal. I'm telling you, when you can say that, it's a very big deal.
People weren't going there to eat. They were going there to watch TV.
It was a coming attraction. My father was very smart. So people would drive. So the whole town, the whole community would be at the restaurant. And what did I hear? Politics. Before we started the show, we were talking about your
kids, yeah.
And your child's opinion at 11 years
very
old
strong.
Of politics.
Yes.
So I grew up in a restaurant hearing my parents and all the tables around every night talking politics, listening to the news. And of course, back in the old days, you remember, it was what, 2, 3 TV
That's
stations?
Right.
That was it. There was no cable.
No.
So when the news came on, everybody watched the news. So this is the environment that I grew up in. So I grew up in a time where Lebanon was prosperous. Lebanon was Paris of the Middle East. We were very open-minded. We were a majority Christian country. The Christians in Lebanon used to be over almost 70% when I was born, when Lebanon got its independence. And this is why we have the government divided very fairly, because as Christians, we want to be fair. So we have the president has to be a Maronite, the Secretary of State has to be a Sunni, so-and-so has to be a Shiite. So everything was divided so we don't offend everybody and everybody can feel included. And this is a great republic. Lebanon is a republic, exactly like the United States, which stand in such stark contrast when you look at the whole Middle East. You've got Israel as a Jewish state. You've got Lebanon, a republic, just like America, in a sea of what I call tribes with flags. Because when you look at Arabic countries, they're tribes with flags. You can identify every country with one royal family or one man regime. So we were open-minded, we were fair, we were welcoming, everybody wanted to come and party in Lebanon. Not just Middle Easterners, but people from all over the world. Sophia Loren, Frank Sinatra. It was the hub to vacation. Lebanese are very good in business, as you know, Middle Easterns. Middle Eastern Christians are highly educated. We're very good in business. We're in the tip of Phoenicia, at the port, doing commerce all along. Beirut became Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. So that's the country in which I was born. I remember going with my parents as a child to Casino du Liban, where, we would attend the concerts and the world singers coming. So that was my life. Life was good. Things began to change when I was about 9 years old. That's when we started importing Palestinian refugees into the country. Actually, Lebanon accepted a third wave of Palestinian refugees while none of the other countries wanted them. This is after King Hussein, after Black September, kicked them out when they tried to overthrow the king. He kicked them out.
From Jordan.
From Jordan.
Most people don't know this, so tell them where they came from.
They came from Jordan after they tried to overthrow the king, basically. And King Hussein literally killed them, bulldozed them, 30,000 of them, and the rest of them came to Lebanon. We accepted them. And I remember watching the evening news and all these Palestinian cars, driving in to Lebanon, and they would stop with my father. My father would give them free food, on the restaurant, trying to help people.
This is in the, early 70s? What year
Right,
is
75,
this?
74,
Okay,
75.
Got it.
And
Everything you're saying, it's pretty much identical to what Iran was in the early 70s, mid 70s.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
By the way, this isn't when she says Beirut was Paris, the Middle East.
Yeah.
You look
Yeah.
at that picture, you wouldn't think that's the Middle East. You would think a different place, even when you go through some of the pictures. Please
And
continue.
people don't realize, people think, the Middle East is desert. Lebanon is mountains and beaches. You can be skiing in the morning and 2 hours later swimming in the Mediterranean. I think the first time in my life I saw a camel was when I moved to Jerusalem and lived in Jerusalem. We don't have any desert. We're like the Switzerland of the Middle East. That's why they call it that. So when I was around 9 years old, we stopped traveling. And I would ask, because we used to go to Beirut. I'm an only child, by the way. I don't have any sisters and brothers. My parents were married for a very long time. They couldn't have any children. Finally, boom, my father is 60 years old. My mother is 55. I pop into the family.
Hold on. How old was your mom?
55.
She gave birth to you at 55?
She got pregnant at 54. She went to the
Gangster.
doctor. I start my book because they hate with the scene. My mother goes to the doctor. She thought she had cancer because her stomach is getting bigger, harder. What else could you have?
Way.
She goes to the
55,
doctor,
Brigitte.
and the doctor says, they do blood work, and the doctor says, you're going to have a baby in 2 months.
Oh
Get
my God.
out of here. Is this some
So
sort of
my
world
father-
record?
So my father put her in a car. The old days men, they were not involved in business. Shipped her off to the nearest hospital, which was 2 hours away.
There he goes.
She goes there. I didn't have a name for 5 days, and because they didn't know if I'm going to be alive or dead or what's going to happen to me. So anyway, they come home, and so that's I was a gift to my parents. I was the apple of their eyes. They gave me everything they could ever give me. They were elderly, so they looked at me as this miracle in their lives. They worshiped me. And I know what love is. I don't need, no matter what happens to me in life, this is why I'm so strong when I fight, because I have experienced love so deep, so unconditional, a belief that I can do anything I put my mind to. I was so adored by my parents that till today, they are the driving force in everything I do. I live, I breathe to honor them. By the way, my parents passed away. I was 22 years old. I became an orphan. They passed away within 9 months of each other. Oh, wow. And I have them both buried with Oscar Schindler on Mount Zion. If you have ever visited Oscar Schindler's grave, you had walked by my parents' grave.
Wow.
But most people don't know that. But back to my upbringing. So when I was around 9 years old, so we lived in South Lebanon, me and my parents, 2 elderly people, very boring, Every holiday, we would drive down to Beirut, which was about a 2-hour drive from the mountains. I lived in the mountains in Marjayoun. We would drive to Beirut to be with my family for Christmas or, Easter and all that. And we stopped traveling. And I would ask my father, how come we're not going to Beirut for Christmas or Easter? And they would say to me, well, we decided to stay home this year, which was strange for me as a child. Where later I learned why as I got a little bit older. That's when Palestinians put their heads together with the Muslims in Lebanon, and they started stopping Christian cars traveling. They would set up fly-by-night checkpoint, and they would get people out of their cars and ask them for their IDs. Well, in Lebanon, our religion is written on our national ID. You are either a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jew. If you have ever held a Middle Eastern ID, our religion is on our ID. And when they would see that this is a Christian family traveling, they would get them out of the car and shoot them in cold blood.
Jesus.
So the word traveled fast. So we Christians became prisoners in our towns and our communities. That's why we stopped traveling. Actually, Tom Friedman promotes it in his book, From Beirut to Jerusalem. He called it identity killing at the time. So he talks about it in his book. By 1975, They had organized the Palestinians and the Muslims. They created what they called Jaysh Lebanon al-Arabi, the Arabic Lebanese army. And, you know, and the Middle East, Christians are not considered Arabs, at least where I come from. You know, we were Phoenicians. It's the Muslims, they're known as Arabs. So they created Jaysh Lebanon al-Arabi, and they started attacking the Christians in Lebanon because they wanted to create a base from which to fight Israel, kill the Jews, and drive them into the sea. And they wanted to use Lebanese democracy, open-mindedness, fairness, tolerance, live and let live type mentality to do that. Something they couldn't do in Jordan because of the dictatorship of the king. But they were able to do it in Lebanon. My town was on the border with Israel. So while they were trying to take over my town, they had to take over the military base in my town above my home, which was about 50 yards from my home, on top of the hill. In bombing the military base, trying to take it over, they missed the military base and 14 rockets exploded in my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble wounded. My 9/11 happened to me in 1975. I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months. You know, when I was watching the images of the World Trade Center on 9/11 come down, and, you know, people screaming for their loved ones and people calling their loved ones names, and you see the smoke on the screen, I could smell that smoke. I know exactly what that smells like. I could hear my parents calling my name as I was pinned under a wall looking for me. My father became deaf, so he couldn't hear my screams when I was screaming because the bombs blew up his eardrums. So from the age of 10 on, anytime I needed to communicate with my father, I had to shout in order for him to hear me. I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months. And as I went from one surgery to another, hooked up with blood bag on one hand, giving me blood, and another IV, and going from one surgery to another, I would ask my father, why did they do this to us? And my father would tell me, because we are Christians, we are considered infidels, and they want to kill us. So I knew that I am wanted dead at the age of 10 simply because I happened to be born as a Christian and live in a Christian town. Whether I practiced my faith or not, it was irrelevant. And this is something Americans cannot understand. You know, they understand that Judaism, Jews are a race. But in the Middle East, if you are a Christian, you are in that block of people. You are like put in a compartment. It doesn't matter whether you're an atheist Christian. I know sounds so weird to Americans listening to this, but we are persecuted because of the group that we are, like the Yazidis, like all the minority groups in the Middle East. I ended up coming back home after 2.5 months. But my home was no longer the home I left. Now remember, I was raised in a beautiful home. I was living the Lebanese dream. I had a chauffeur to drive me to school. We had a housekeeper. We had a maid. Our life turned upside down. 2 days before our house was bombed, my father wanted to bring us to America. So he goes to the bank in Beirut because the banks were being robbed, bombed. God knows what was going to happen. My father withdrew his life savings and banknotes from Lebanon to bring us to America. 2 days later, my father's money was burned to ashes. Jeez. We went from living a wonderful life to losing it all. My father at that time was 70 years old. You don't start over when you're 70 years old. So we end up living in a bomb shelter. So 8 by 10 room, underground, no electricity, no water, and very little food. When we went into the bomb shelter, ironically, the bomb shelter was built by money given to, a part of it by money given to my father from the Lebanese government to protect us from Israel, because supposedly the barbaric Israeli army is going to come slaughter us, and therefore all people in South Lebanon, the money said, okay, we give you half, you pay half, you build bomb shelters because the Jews are going to come kill you. That's the bomb shelter I ended up living in. We go into the bomb shelter, and we thought it's going to be 2 weeks. My father, being a restaurateur, the bomb shelter was right behind the restaurant. That's where he stored all the liquor and the wine, underground, all whatever. So I remember the first 2 weeks, we slept on boxes, these huge boxes that came to our restaurant, with big, either machine, fridge box, or whatever stuff for that thing. We put a blanket on top of it. We put a pillow, another blanket. And I remember sleeping on a box filled with coal, the black coal that you used to charcoal to grill, shish kebabs, Yeah. So I slept in that, and we thought it's going to be a matter of, a couple weeks. The whole world is going to wake up and see what's happening to the Christians in Lebanon. Everybody's going to come save the Christians. 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by, 1 month went by, 2 months went by. 1 year went by. Obviously, by that time, we had brought in some mattresses, put them on the floor of our bomb shelter, and that's where we slept. And the world forgot about us. And to get some food, my mother and I would crawl under bombs falling off, because my father, remember, he can't hear. So he cannot duck to hear the bomb, bzzz, boom, before it explodes. So when we would hear the whiz, we know to duck. And so my mother and I would go out and dig for dandelion. It was the only greenery we had to eat. For food, we had stored like dried chickpeas and dried beans and rice. So we could manage with that oil, anything. My mother would soak the chickpeas overnight. And because they had bugs in them, my job was with a pin to dig the bug out, put it on the side, put the chickpea in here. And that's how I killed the time. That's how we cooked our food. And, that was the only greenery we had to eat when we would go out and dig for dandelions. To get some water, we would crawl under snipers' bullets. And we were surrounded by Islamic snipers and Palestinians who surrounded our town, the hills around our town. And every day we leave our bomb shelter to get some water. My mother and I and my father would say our last goodbyes, because we did not know if we're going to come back dead or alive. And we would hug. And it was every single day you did the same thing, and it became like the way of living.
Like routine.
Routine. We would get some water from a nearby spring, and then we would come back. And this became my existence. I remember as a child, as I was growing up as a teenager, we didn't have any clothing. I was growing up as a girl, and I remember my mother, as my foot started growing from my shoes, she would cut the front of my shoes, and she would say, "Look, Mommy, now they are like sandals, so my toes can stick out because my foot." And she did not want me walking bare feet on the bomb shelter. And she would cut my pajama pants because I grew taller, and she would cut them, and she said, "Look, they are called Bermuda shorts," and she would cut the sleeves, so I would grow into my clothes. And I remember laying on the bed and lice, because when you sleep on the floor, your head gets invested in lice. I know this is uncomfortable conversation in the West. People cannot imagine looking at Brigitte Gabriel and imagining Brigitte Gabriel as a child sleeping on the floor with lice on her head. And I remember my mother would take kerosene or benzene or mazout, and she would dip it because the lice would die
leave,
from the fume. And I remember sitting and my mother's combing my hair and saying, "It's okay, honey, when we get some water we can wash it." And this was my existence. And I remember after years, it becomes the norm because you don't know anything any better. We didn't go to school for 2 years. No studying. Everybody was in the bomb shelter. And I remember, we just killed the time just sitting, talking with each other. And after a while, there's not much you can talk about. And I remember at the age of 13, we heard from one of our militia, Christian men stopped by because, we were a very small town. And he said, "Look, we heard a lot of chatter on the radio, and I don't think we're going to last tonight." He said, "They're going to attack our town tonight. And if I don't see you tomorrow, I wish you a merciful death." And I remember, he left. And I remember my mother combing my long black hair. And I dressed in my Easter dress, my Sunday best. Because, you get one Easter dress, and that's like your whole summer dress for the summertime. And it was blue and white. And blue flowers with a white on white background. And I remember she was tying the belt in the back, making a bow. And I remember she tied a white ribbon in my hair. And I'm sobbing. "I don't want to die. Please, I don't want to die. Do something."
How old are you at this time?
13. Because I wanted to look pretty when I am dead, knowing that when they come to slaughter me, there would be no one to bury me. And I'm getting all dressed up, and I'm saying, "Please do something. I don't want to die. Please, I'm only 13. And there was nothing my mother could say to me. And I remember sitting in the corner of our bomb shelter. And my parents were very devout Christians. And my father opened up the Bible, his prayer book, and he started reading from Psalms. I shall walk into the valley of death and fear no evil, for thou art with me. And my parents said to me, when they come to slaughter us tonight, we will create a distraction. We lived a long life. You are a young child. We'll create a distraction, and you just run towards Israel and don't look back. Run as fast as you can. We lived 5 kilometers from the Israeli border. So from my house, you can look at Betula. And we knew if we go to the Jews and beg for help, the Jews are not going to slaughter us because we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims. Few people from my town went to Israel and told them, look, we're surrounded to be slaughtered. We're not going to last. We need your help. That night, Israel came in physically into Lebanon. Thankfully, I didn't have to make the decision to run to Israel because that's when Israel came in physically into Lebanon in Operation Litani in 1978 and established the security zone in southern Lebanon that everybody screams, oh, occupied territory. No, it wasn't. We begged Israel to come save us. Israel comes in, sets up artillery bases around the hills of our town and our area to protect us. And this is how we ended up surviving for another 5 years. And I remember at that time we started going to school. They opened up the school. So because, education is very important for people in the Judeo-Christian world. And so I go to school. So they cramped 2 years in one. So for 2 years, we went to school nonstop. So I did 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, all in 2 years, directly one after another.
You're living in Lebanon at this point or in Israel?
In Lebanon, still in the bomb shelter.
Okay.
So we were picked up many days in a tank, those big tanks with the cannon on the front. You can fit 18 children in that tank. Wow. And sometimes I was brought back from school in that tank or taken to school in that tank. And many days when we are at school, the principal would run in. So the school was the first floor of the building. So all the kids were crammed into the first floor because it was like a shelter. If a bomb falls, it's like a shelter. And many days the principal would storm through the hallway running, get out, get out, get out. You've got 15 minutes to get home. Everybody school, leave. And we would jump up, pick up our books, grab them. We don't even have to say a word to our teacher, and everybody runs out. So we lived in a house. There was no school buses. Everybody walked to school. And we would run. And many days, I barely made it home to my bomb shelter before the bombing. And I remember hiding in a ditch and using my books, so I'm carrying, all these books. I've got history books, whatever, on my head to protect me from the shrapnels. So I would hear, bzzz, I would duck. The shrapnels will fall. I would put this over my head, wait until all the shrapnels fell off, and I would run back to the shelter.
Brigitte, for context, who's fighting who? Is this Hezbollah? Is this the Muslim Brotherhood?
Hezbollah was
Is this
not.
the IDF? Who's fighting exactly?
Hezbollah wasn't created at that time. This is the combined army of Palestinians with Muslims in Lebanon fighting for the Palestinian cause. And they were joined by people from all over the Middle East. We had Muslims fighting in Lebanon, from Syria, from Iran, from Egypt, from Djibouti. We had black people, and we don't have black people in Lebanon. So we had African Americans, black people on drugs who would be running towards you with bullets. They won't even stop. They had them drugged out. That's who was fighting in Lebanon.
Fighting for who, though? Fighting against what?
The Christians who are trying to protect their democracy, saying we do not want a war, get out of our country, give us back our country, and with the Palestinians trying to create a base, a hub from which to fight Israel. Because by 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, Syria was shelling Israel out of Lebanon using Lebanese territories, calling it the Lebanese resistance. The Lebanese had nothing to do with it.
In the Golan Heights.
Yeah, that's right, from the towns in Lebanon, to the point where all the northern Israeli towns were living in bomb shelters just like us. In the war, but before I get to that, people ask me, how did you learn English in a bomb shelter? So here's an interesting story. You'd appreciate that because, we are an immigrant here, at least most of us, So you'd appreciate the tenacity, when we put our mind to something. So after a few years in the bomb shelter, we figured out, or my father was told, that if you can operate black and white television, small black and white TV on a car battery. So my father would plug the TV into the car battery that we brought into the bomb shelter, and we would watch the news to see what on earth is happening with the rest of the world around us. And if there was any left in the battery at the end of the day, I would watch The Love Boat. So on Wednesday night, we had The Love Boat. On Friday night, we had Dallas. And I would write subtitles on my arm in English. And because So if two people looked into each other's eyes and one guy said to the lady, or she asked a question and he said, maybe. So I knew maybe meant whatever they wrote down in Arabic. And I wrote a huge vocabulary on my arm. And because we barely had water to drink, let alone shower. We showered only once a week in a bucket, threw it on, scrubbed ourselves. I built a huge vocabulary on my arm. That's how I learned English. I never studied English at school. Because I knew if I make it out of that, what President Trump, God bless him, calls a hellhole of a country, if I ever make it out of Lebanon, and I need to be able to speak English in order for me to make it to America. Wow. And in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, working with the Christians, trying to help the Christians take back their country. All the Christians in Lebanon would go to Israel, get trained how to fight, and come back to Lebanon. And then they were working together to expel the radical Islamic element out of the country.
I can ask you a question, Brigitte. I mean, amazing story. When you say something like that, from a child to that, and then when you hear just American people, like children, complaining about traffic or my internet's not working.
My internet's not fast enough.
Yeah, it's insane to hear that. I want the whole time you were talking about this, my question was, where does this hatred to Christians and Christianity just come out of nowhere from? What did we do so wrong to make like that Muslim community just hate and want to kill us right off the rip for no reason? Where does that come from?
Look, there are 2,000 years of war history in the Middle East. This did not start yesterday.
Yeah.
But it ramped up after the creation of the religion of Islam. Now, not all Muslims are radical. You and I, we lived in the Middle East, Patrick. They are the most wonderful people, hospitable, kind, open-hearted. Not all of them want to kill you. However, there is such a radical element to the religion. If you are a Christian or a Jew or Armenian raised in the Middle East, you understand there's a saying, أولاً يأتي السبت وبعده الأحد. First comes Saturday, then comes Sunday. First we kill the Jews, then we come for the Christians. So if you're a child raised in the Middle East, you're raised hearing this sentence. And you don't understand it as a child because it's just something you hear.
Yeah.
But when you grow up, when the call of jihad is declared, all of a sudden the division between communities is so stark and it's so deep. While we as Christians, in our faith, I'm raised as a Maronite, Maronite Catholic. And in our faith, forgive those who trespass against you. Whoever slaps you on one cheek, you turn the other one. We are taught all these things. Do unto others what you want others to do unto you. We are raised in the church. We are taught these things. But it's very different in the Islamic world, and especially with the radicals, like the Khomeinis in Iran and his followers, that they believe that we are... to stay alive, we either have to pay the jizya or the protection tax or convert to Islam. In our case, in Lebanon, they were attacking the Christians so viciously. And at that time, Hezbollah was not created yet. By 1982, when Israel came into Lebanon and expelled the radical Islamic element out of Lebanon, including the PLO, we had 11 Islamic terrorist organizations operating out of Lebanon, including the PLO. And that's shortly after Khomeini came to power in Iran. So Iran looked at Lebanon and they said, you know what? We've got all these Muslims in Lebanon, all these Muslim groups fractured. Why don't we combine them all into one party, call it the Party of Allah, Hizb Allah? So Iran started funding and investing in organizing all the Islamic radicals in Lebanon, because we have a big majority Shia in Lebanon, big majority Shia in Syria, and then Iran, and then there is some in Yemen, and the rest of the Middle East is Sunni. So that's how it started in Lebanon. My mother was wounded in that war, and we had to take her to Israel for treatment. And that's when I got to experience the compassion of Israel. That's when I really got to know Israelis. My mother was wounded in the war, on the second day of the war, as she was running into the bomb shelter. My father goes to the mattress in the bomb shelter and he gives me $60. Pulls out $60 and he says, here's some money in case you need it, because you're going to need to take your mom to the hospital in Israel. Up in that time, we had no medical help. The hospital in my house, in my town, was completely bombed out. We had no medical anything. Anybody that needed any medical attention after 1978 went to Israel. If you needed open heart surgery, you went to Israel free of charge, provided by the government of Israel and the good-hearted people of Israel. If you needed brain surgery, if you needed to deliver a baby, if you needed whatever. When my mother was wounded, we had to take her to Israel for treatment. So by that time, I knew, we're alive because of Israel. We're very close to Israel. The Christians and the Israelis became like this. We go up to the hospital, to the Lebanese hospital, and that Israel had fixed up one room, set up one wing with one Israeli doctor on duty, 2 Israeli nurses to give first aid to people who were wounded. They gave first aid to my mother. They put her in an Israeli donated ambulance, Magen David donated ambulance. They put her in an Israeli donated ambulance, and we flew to the border, 10-minute drive. And the driver was a Lebanese driver. We got to the border. They take my mother out of that ambulance and took her into another ambulance inside Israel, inside Metula, to drive us to the nearest hospital in Itzfat, which was about an hour away from the border. I walked around to the Lebanese driver to pay him the fee for the ambulance because he asked me, do you have any money for the fee? And like an innocent teenager who's never touched money, 17-year-old, I hand him my money and I said, how much do I owe you? And he looks at the money and he said, give me 30. And I thanked him for his service, and I got with my mother. I'm crying. I'm, like, oh my gosh, I'm 17 years old. My mom is wounded. My deaf dad by himself in the bomb shelter. I don't know what's going to happen to him. Nobody to take care of him. I go to, we get inside the ambulance and we drive to the border. And this time we're seeing all the Israeli tanks lined up to invade Lebanon, to go into Lebanon. We get to the hospital. The Israeli driver gets out of the ambulance. And by the way, during the drive, he would talk to me. He was listening to the radio. He told me he was a reservist. He was just pulled in. And he would tell me how far Israel was advancing into Lebanon. We get into, we arrive to the hospital. I walk around to pay the Israeli driver his fee for the ambulance ride, thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if the 10-minute ride cost me 30, I'm sure I'm not going to have enough for this guy. And I looked down and I said, how much do I owe you? And he says to me, you don't owe me anything. What is this for? Because I'm like handing out my hand with the money. And I said, the fee for the ambulance ride. He said, oh, no. He said, this is a free service from us to you. You don't owe me anything. You keep your money and you take good care of yourself. And I wish your mother a speedy recovery. And I was so touched. I could not believe my ears, my eyes. I just thanked him so much because, he could have taken my money and partied all night and I would not have known the difference, but he didn't. That's when I realized that the Lebanese driver basically robbed me. He stole my money. That was my first experience between the difference between the Arabic culture and the Israeli culture. I thanked him. We got into the emergency room and there were hundreds of people laying on the hospital floor in the emergency room. It was a war scene. Palestinian terrorists brought in from Lebanon. Muslims brought in from Lebanon. Israeli soldiers brought in from Lebanon. Lebanese Christians like me brought in from Lebanon. The doctors were treating everyone according to their injury. They did not see religion. They did not see political affiliation. They did not see nationality. They saw people in need and they helped. The doctor treated my mother before he treated the Israeli soldier wounded laying next to her because her injury was more severe. I couldn't believe my eyes.
These are the stories that are necessary to hear for some that haven't experienced it. Just for a couple minutes before we go into some of the stories here, why do you think a lot of people in America, especially with academia, a lot with mainstream media, and the level of if I go on Twitter and I look at a Bassem Youssef, if I look at a person who is out there defending Palestinians, Gaza, right, and just showing all the stuff that's going on with Israel, why are they so much louder than Christians or even Jews? Why are they so much louder to the point where the world is sitting there saying, maybe they're right and maybe you're wrong? Maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe you're telling a mythical story to get people to panic and worry. And obviously, you know where I stand. Everybody knows where I'm at. But why do you think so many people are sitting there right now having a completely different position with Israel? especially after what Hamas did to Israel on October 7th? Why do you think that's happening?
They are totally brainwashed because of the propaganda. So I'm from the Middle East. So I have friends on my social media from the Middle East. And so I have friends from Jordan. I have even Palestinian Christian friends.
Yeah.
I have friends from Lebanon. And I see what they're posting on their Facebook feed.
Mm-hmm.
And the lies that they are posting. A lot of them have never even been to Israel, have never even dealt with Jews other than what they hear on television, the propaganda and the lies and the AI. I just put up a video because my friends tell me, oh, this is AI. I remember sending a friend of mine a video of the woman in Israel with her stomach being cut open. I do not know if you've seen that video. The IDF trying to protect the images from, because they want to protect the family members. If you don't want to see your loved one being tortured like this, but they released those images to the press. So the press was able to see those images. And I remember sending that video to my friend in Jordan, a Christian friend in Jordan, who's totally brainwashed about the Palestinian cause. He's originally Palestinian, etc. And I said, I want you to see this level of barbarism where they cut a pregnant woman's stomach open on October 7th, took the baby out, and they put gaff tape on her mouth so she can't even scream her screams when they're cutting her stomach open. And when she would pass out because she is being tortured, just body shock, they would hit her to wake her up so she can see what they're doing to her baby.
Jeez.
And I sent him that video. That's a Hamas video shot by Hamas. Because, they had body cameras. They were so proud of what they did. They were bragging about it. And he said to me, this is a lie. This is a video of some blah, 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 back some Palestinian being tortured, blah, blah, blah. They are fed such lies by the Palestinian propaganda machine that even when you show them the truth, they are unable to believe it. Now, I talk about the compassion of the Israel. I know the Israelis are not capable of doing anything like this to any Muslim woman. You know that. We have Israeli friends and Jewish friends. They don't think like that. I lived in both worlds. And I'm getting to that. I was born and raised in Lebanon. I ended up going to Israel and living in Israel. So I have a very different view. I have a very unique and fortunate view to have actually at one time held residences in the West Bank, in Israel, and in Lebanon because I was a journalist. So I worked in Jerusalem for 5 days out of the week. I would drive my car to Lebanon, change my license plate at the border, take Israeli license plates out, screw in French license plate, same car, drive it into Lebanon, do my business in Lebanon, drive back into Israel, check it for bombs, unscrew the license plates. I'll get to that. So I have a very unique point of view of both because I've lived in both of them. But I want to continue a little bit about the compassion of the Israelis and why I know the Israelis the way I do. After we were finished in the emergency room, and I was talking to you about my mother being in the emergency room, they gave her first aid. They took her up to the 4th floor of the hospital, where 2 other Lebanese ladies were brought in that morning. 1 Muslim, 1 Druze from Lebanon. They put my mother in the room, and we were not there but 5 minutes, and I heard all this commotion outside our window. So I ran to the balcony to see what was going on. And I looked down, and 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed, bringing in wounded people from Lebanon. And I remember looking down stretcher after stretcher, carrying, and everybody ran to the balcony to see what was happening. And I remember being surrounded by mothers of Israeli wounded soldiers in the war, fathers, sisters, wives. It was an unbelievable scene. And I remember looking down, not making eye contact with anybody next to me, because even though I knew I'm a Christian, they didn't know that. I know I'm their friend. They're not going to do anything to me. I just felt so out of place looking at that scene. I didn't make any eye contact with anyone. I felt sick to my stomach. I felt brokenhearted that these people are wounded because of the war with my country. And all of a sudden I feel this tapping on my shoulder. And this lady next to me looks at me and she puts her arm around me and she said, "You are new here, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, they just brought in my mother. She's in this room." And without skipping a beat, she puts her arm around me and she hugs me and she said, "Oh, don't worry. We'll take good care of her. And if you need anything, my name is Leah." And I remember breaking down crying. I remember breaking down because I felt such human quality that I knew it did not exist in my culture. I was standing on the 4th floor of that balcony knowing if I was a Jew standing in any hospital in any Arabic country, I would be thrown down to my death as shouts of joy of Allahu Akbar would echo through the street and down the surrounding neighborhoods. But they didn't. I spent 22 days in that hospital. Those days changed my life, changed the way I think about Israel. There were people being treated, Palestinians, Muslims, Druze, Israeli treated everybody in such a human way, in such a compassionate way. It was unbelievable. I had to go back to Lebanon to take care of my parents. But I vowed that one day I will return to Israel because these were the type of people I wanted to live amongst. These are the type of characters I wanted to have. As I stood on that balcony that day, I knew these people were able to forgive and love the Palestinians, their enemy, in a way I wasn't able to. And I was the Christian who was taught to love like Jesus taught. Those days changed my life. I ended up going back to Lebanon that day. But 2 years later, I made my way back to Jerusalem and I became news anchor for World News in the Middle East, covering world events from 1984 till 1989. My story is detailed in a New York Times bestseller titled Because They Hate, where I talk about my journey into Israel and then my career. You'll find it as an entrepreneur, because we're not getting into the entrepreneurial stuff. You'll find it very interesting how I ended up being at the top of the pecking order of journalism, being the most famous, richest, youngest woman in the Middle East. I ended up becoming news anchor for World News in the Middle East, covering world events. And as I reported on world events, I started realizing that what I used to think was a regional problem between a majority radical Islamic Middle East trying to either kill or expel the minority Christians and Jews had become a worldwide problem. But the world was not paying attention. When I went back to visit Israel in 2018, so I ended up leaving Israel. I met my American husband, a war correspondent, that we worked together in Jerusalem. I got married. That's how I ended up in America, by marriage. I came here in 1989, but before I came here, I wanted to make sure that my parents are buried in Israel, because I wanted to make sure that my children yet unborn will always know where my loyalty lies. I wanted them to always be drawn to Israel, to be drawn to what Israel represented, the character, the humanity, the respect, the authentic multicultural nation that endorses everybody. I buried my parents in Jerusalem. They are buried on Mount Zion. Wow. When I went back in 2018 to Israel, I went back and visited that hospital in 2018. This was just recent history. I went back and visited the hospital where my mother was. Unannounced, nobody knew I was there. I walked into the reception desk asking, is there any doctors working here that used to work here in 1984 and 1982? And of course, there was nobody there. But somehow I told them, look, my mother was here. I'm Lebanese. Can I go up to the 4th floor, whatever? Anyway, we ended up going to the floor, which is now a maternity ward or something. They changed it. And I took my daughter with me to that hospital. And when I was there, and when they found out who I am, and the head of the hospital came out, and I found out while I am at the hospital, there are Syrian people wounded from Syria. Remember, this is ISIS 2018. Mm-hmm. Wounded from Syria, brought into the border. The Israeli brought them to the hospital to treat them. They come to the border literally with a sticky yellow pad, a little note on their thing. The Israeli doctor, most of the time, they don't even know what they're dealing with, where they're wounded. It's somebody who looked at them, probably somebody sympathetic, and said, that they're blown up, this, that. Israel brings them into the hospital. The press is not allowed to talk to them. You know why? Because the Syrians are so afraid that ISIS or people in Syria would kill their family members. They are not even able to acknowledge that Israel saved their lives.
Brigitte, can I bring this to present day? Ridiculous story, by the way. Incredible story. Even Yahya Sinwar, who is the head of Hamas, was in an Israeli prison. He had a major medical issue. I think it was a brain tumor, brain cancer. An Israeli doctor, Israeli medical staff saved his life. Think about that for a second. He went on to go back to Gaza, and now we know what happened October 7th. I want to bring it back to present day. Intersectionality. You hear this term DEI, just to kind of bring it to today. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. You see these people marching. Gays for Gaza, Queers for Palestine. You see this situation going on. And I've heard you comment about like this 100-year plan to basically have the West crumble from within, using our tolerance, using our appreciation for diversity, using our equity and inclusion against us. What do you think is going on in this sort of woke mind virus where you have these, hardliner authoritarian regimes intersecting with these super leftist, liberal, woke mind virus-esque type people, and they're chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Most of these people couldn't tell you what river or what sea is going on beyond. But at the same time, I don't think they're evil. I don't think they're they hate us, these types of people, the DEI crowd. I just think they're completely ignorant. Speak to that for a second.
They're actually good-hearted young Americans who want to love everybody.
Yeah.
And there is nothing wrong with that. It's a wonderful quality to have. This is why people come from all over the world to come to America, not only to pursue a dream, but because in America, you are welcomed with an open arm. I mean, immigrants like David, like Patrick and I, okay? So I'm a first-generation immigrant. I know he's a first-generation immigrant. I'm not sure about the three of you.
You were born here?
Okay.
My mom and dad were born in Iran, but I was born here.
Born in America.
He's
a Canadian. But
so
don't worry
we're
about
the ones who made it through the process to come to America. So other than the fact that we can be all we can be as Americans, the fact that America opens you with open arms, no matter what country you come from, you become an American. You are an American. You are one of us, whether you're Japanese, Chinese, Mexican, black, white, yellow, Hispanic.
Jamaican,
It's
everybody.
unbelievable. We are truly the melting pot out of many. We become one. That is such a unique, unbelievable concept. I never felt a stranger in America from the day I landed. I'm an entrepreneur. I started a television production company. My clients were Oprah, Dr. Phil, Inside Edition, ABC, NBC, CBS. When I published my book, by the way, I couldn't even give it to Oprah. She couldn't even know who I am and what I did. Otherwise, I'll lose the business. I'll lose her business. But that's beside the fact. America is I never felt discriminated against because, I'm brown, or I'm a woman, or I'm 5 feet tall. I went for the gusto and I got it and I lived the American dream. And I can do a whole show with you just on being an entrepreneur in America. As a woman raised in a bomb shelter, English is my third language. I speak 4 languages and how I made it in America. And I didn't even go to college. People are stunned. They assume I have so many degrees. Because in America, when you have a brain, the sky is the limit. The problem, so it's wonderful quality for our children to be inclusive, to want to love, to want to change the world, to make the world a better place. Every single one of us at 20 years old, we wanted to make the world a better place and we wanted to change the world and we had dreams of how life should be and how everybody should get along together. The problem with our stupid, unguided youth today, the snowflakes, they have never experienced hardship. They never had to work for anything. They were, even with their grades. Patrick remembers when we went to school, we had to work to pass. If I did not pass, and by the way, my schooling, when I started school at 4 years old, I had to study 2 languages. I started with French and Arabic. And I had to learn, by the age of 6, I had to write in French and in Arabic, take geography in French and in Arabic, take writing, history in French and in Arabic. And then they add English at the 6th grade. I didn't study English. I stayed with the French course and I ended up learning English, the way I shared with you. So when in America, the sky is the limit and what you can accomplish. But the brainwashing that happened in America happened systematically over decades. They say 20-year success, an overnight success takes 20 years. And my first book, Because They Hate, which came out basically in 2006, if you read it, you think I wrote it yesterday. I discuss all the money being funneled into our universities. I have a whole chapter about the 5th column in our universities. And I talk about money flowing from the Middle East into our universities to the tune of millions. Harvard, Georgetown, Columbia, Rutgers, etc. Setting up Middle East study departments and political science departments and are appointing Arab professors who are anti-Israel and anti-America to teach our students that America is bad, Israel is evil, and the Islamic world is the underdog.
Where's the money coming from?
All over the Middle East, from wealthy sheikhs, wealthy foundations, funneling it to bring students to America and to these universities. and using the Title VI program. The Title VI program was instituted by our government after World War II to teach American students about foreign cultures and foreign languages and foreign governments so they can be an asset to our country. Those who want to get into the diplomatic field, work for the State Department, get into the CIA. So what the Arabs of the Middle East started using, they used the Title VI program to funnel the money through that program into our universities, setting up Middle East Study Department and Political Science Department. So they started brainwashing the kids from the top level from their professors. At the same time, the Muslim Student Association was established on American college campuses. So all these students being imported from the Middle East, from countries who hate America and hate Israel, they're already brainwashed. They get here, they immediately plug into the Muslim Student Association, and they start working together on multicultural thing. Oh, show up for hummus night on Friday night and learn about the wonderful religion of Islam and Mecca and fasting. And so the brainwashing systematically happened for 20 years, and that's how you ended up with what you have today.